First off, Joyce, a big thank you to you for setting this up. I gave her a call and said, Joyce, we have some new building codes and we need to, get the Farmington area updated on what those changes are. And she was able to set this up on short notice. So a big kudos to you for your time and effort to set this up. Thank you. Appreciate it very, very much.
It's our honor.
So,
I think
right.
everyone here agrees.
All right. So what we're going to be talking about today are the significant changes on the 2015 IRC. We were on the 2009. We passed the 2012, and now we're on the 2015. And there's no longer any grace period. That grace period was July 1st of 2016. So the 2015 building codes are in effect. So once again, what we'll be talking about today are significant changes. What are those changes or amendments that you made to that building code? So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. So this is the effective date that we just talked about. So the actual adoption of the code took place on November 15, 2016. This is when the code was actually published. But what we did this go around in the body of the codes is we put some verbiage on the bottom which granted a 6-month grace period. So they put the effective date of July 1st, 2017. So once again, that date is in effect. So everybody's required to be in the 2015 building code. So what's the objective here? The purpose of the rule is to establish minimum standards for the general construction of residential buildings in New Mexico. Adoption of the 2015 International Residential Code. This rule adopts by reference the 2015 International Residential Code as amended by this rule. Oftentimes, contractors, even architects, they think, well, the states adopted the International Residential Code. What we do is we adopt the International Residential Code by reference with the New Mexico Administrative Code. So the New Mexico Administrative Code is always the first code, and then the code that you have adopted is the second code. So you always want to reference the New Mexico Administration Code to see what those significant changes are, if any. One of the major things that we didn't change this go around is the Energy Conservation Code. We chose to stay in the 2009. At the end of the day, it's all about dollars and cents. What is that added cost to go from the 9 to the 15? And I could tell you some of those costs were significant. And again, it all comes down to dollars and cents. So we chose to stay with the 2009. So any references in the 15 that referenced the 2015 Energy Code, you got to refer back to the 2009 because that's the code that we're under. We're going to get into Chapter 3, Building and Planning. So again, this is where some of the significant changes are, changes that we made. And once we're done with this presentation, I'd be more than happy to share it with Joyce so you don't have to take any notes, and she could email it to everybody. That way they can reference what those significant changes are, just so that you could have. So one of the changes we made under climate and geographic design criteria, if you see on the bottom over here, as found online, before what we used to do is we used to call out the actual website and we'd have it noted on there. But what we were finding out is every 3 months, 6 months, 7 months, that website was changing and it was no longer, effective. So what we did is we put just as found online. So if you do a Google search, you should be able to find that website easily. One of the other changes that we made under fire protection of floors. This is something that they placed in the body of the code where the underside of floors would have to be protected with 1/2-inch chipboard or 5/8. So what we did is we amended this out of the code and it's no longer required. And the reason for that, this is a complete new addition to the code that is not appropriate for New Mexico. There's no proof that this is an issue in New Mexico where the vast majority of houses are built with slabs on grade. This change was created in locations in the U.S. where the Later finishing of walkout basements is a common practice, or frost depths are much deeper. So once again, we didn't think it was necessary, and that's a lot of added costs if you do have a subfloor. So we didn't think it was necessary, so we took it out of the code. It's been amended. This is dwelling and garage fire separation. The reason why I have this in here is this topic always comes in every code cycle, from the 3 to the 6 to the 9. It was even in the 12 to 15, where the separation between the house and the dwelling in the IRC, it could be half-inch gypboard. What we've done is we've amended that, and we require that it be 5/8 gypboard between the house and the dwelling. So that is in the NMAC. It is in there. All the information is in there verbatim, the way I have it right here. Another question that comes up: are you still required to have the spring-loaded hinges between the house and the dwelling? The answer is yes. You could have the spring-loaded hinges, or you can have an actuated hinge that sits at the top of the door, so long as that door is self-closing. If you go to the New Mexico Building Code, this is a table that's referenced in there on what the separation requirements are. If you notice, from the residence to the attic, from the habitable rooms above the garage, everything's called out all the way to the bottom, and it's all 5/8 gypboard. That's what would be required. So it is in the body of the code now. If you build a garage, this is what the garage has to look like when it's done. So, all right. So, I'm just joking. Yeah. So emergency escape and rescue openings. Again, this is just kind of a refresher. 310.2.1 minimum openable areas. Of course, everybody knows the requirement is 5.7. How many of you know that there's an exception in the code? There is an exception in the code where you could reduce that square footage down to 5.0. However, the seal height has to be on the outside a minimum of 44 inches. So there's an exception where you could reduce that egress. And again, that's only on a one-story structure. This kind of gives you an example of what we're talking about. So you got the sliders side to side. You still have, of course, have to have the minimum openable areas, width, height. And then you have this one here that slides up and down. Again, got to have 24 inches. That doesn't go away. It's still required. Smoke alarms. This is another, again, just refresher. This hasn't gone away. Smoke alarms are required. But what we're going to talk about here is the placement of smoke alarms. Oftentimes I go to houses after the fact and I see smoke alarms that are tucked right on the corner of the ceiling and the wall. That's not acceptable. Smoke alarms don't operate that way. So let me show you some examples. So you see, if there's an example here, you have a smoke alarm. It has to be a minimum of 4 inches away from the corner of the ceiling and the wall. They say, once again, they say smoke doesn't get into corners. So that's the reason why you want to have it away from the wall and or the ceiling. And if you look at the manufacturer specifications on some of these smoke alarms, some of them require that you be a minimum of 6 inches. It just depends on what product you're using, but for sure you have to be at least a minimum of 4 inches away from there. Here's another example of the 4 inches. If you got a pitched roof, same thing would apply. From the peak of that roof, you want to be at least 4 inches down before you place any of those smoke alarms. On this type of roof as well also. So now we're going to get into carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide detectors were introduced into the code in the 2009. They are required. Anytime you have a gas fired appliance, you have to put these carbon monoxide detectors. There are some carbon monoxide combination smoke detectors that are acceptable and you can use. So if you come across a situation where you have to do a combination, that is legal and you can do it. On this section of the code right here, I like to call this the Ron Hibner, my chief inspector. I think it was a good change that we made in the body of the code is before it said a slope is required, but it didn't tell you what that slope required is. So what we did is we've amended that section of the code, and in the body of the code, we've indicated what that minimum requirement would be, and that is 1% slope on any garages that you have to have for water to get out of there. This one is stair treads and risers. This is one of the ones that the State Home Builders Association was instrumental in putting back into the body of the code. This was removed under the 2006 code adoption, and they didn't like it. So what they did is they submitted some amendments, and we were able to bring it back into the body of the code of the 2015. So the changes are the riser height shall not be more than 8 inches. And the tread depth should not be less than 9 inches. On this red area over here, that's what's in the code now. Risers 7 3/4 inches, treads 10 inches. So this is what's been amended right here. The reason for this, the purpose of the amendment is to retain the stair geometry requirements to those that have historically been allowed under the Building Officials and Code Administrators National Building Code, BOCA. This amendment will allow continued use of the 8 and 9 geometry, which is also historically an accepted requirement of many other states and local jurisdictions across the country. Many others actually adopt stair geometry requirements of 8 and 9. So that's the justification and reason for amending that section of the code. Through the MAC process, which is it's a lot of work to do, I made a mistake. And this is a mistake I made is under section 311.7.7.3. It should read 311.7.8.3. So when I have an opportunity, I will get back into there and fix that, but I did make a mistake on that. And the red area is the correct reference. Fire sprinkler systems. This hasn't gone away. Even if we wanted to change it, we couldn't, because it's state law. And I know this is something that the state home builders was instrumental in passing through the legislature, where in single family dwellings where sprinklers would not be required if any of these requirements apply. There's another section that we changed under section 320, accessibility. Delete the text of this section and see section 310.5 of the IBC. And this is what it reads below. So again, this is mainly dealing like with if somebody has like maybe in a rural area where they have like maybe a cottage or something that they rent overnight, kind of like some type of overnight stay. So this is what this section talks about. Chapter 4, foundations. Where slabs on the ground are cast monolithically and rigid insulation is used as a forming material, a minimum of 1.5 inch rigid insulation shall be used. So if you have a monolithic slab, it doesn't matter what climate zone you're in, if you're going to use the insulation as a forming material, it has to be a minimum of 1.5 inches to be able to do that. And this is a lot of the reason why. If you look at this foundation system, this is a straight edge here, 2x4. There were issues on this particular structure. You see how far the insulation has concaved back in. So what occurs is instead of having a minimum of a 12-inch footing at the bottom, you have a 3 or a 4-inch footing because that insulation is pushed all the way in. And what happens is when you're on the job site, there's some laborers behind you, putting some dirt in there, and they might maybe put too much dirt and they push that insulation too far. And when that happens, you have a footing that doesn't meet code. Here's another situation of some of the things that happen is you have blowouts, that happen in this area. Next thing you know, you got a chipping hammer. You're breaking that out to try to get a straight edge on there. Here's the other example with a straight edge from the top. You see how much that foundation has pushed in. Again, that's not acceptable. And this is kind of the aftermath when that happens. You don't have the proper footing down there supporting that structure. That house starts settling or collapsing, so you got to get some of these jacks to jack that house back up. And if you have to do this, that's going to be extremely expensive. It could cost anywhere from, on a single family dwelling, you could be looking at anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000. It just depends. It's really expensive. Here's another thing that's not acceptable on foundations. Just some things that we see out there is you see the rebar at the edge of the foundation. Where does the rebar belong? It belongs inside the footing. It can be on the edge. Here's kind of the aftermath of that footing on the measurement of how much actual footing is underneath that structure. If you look at the tape measure there, we have approximately 3.5 inches of footing, and the minimum code is 12 inches, and that's definitely not acceptable at all. Foundations, we have a foundation system where on this particular job they have a girder. They missed the spot footing on the inside of that crawl space, so they said, well, we'll just get a cinder block and just block it and block it with some wood and call it good. Again, these are some things that we see out there when we receive complaints. That's not acceptable. If that footing was in place where it was supposed to be, they need to correct it and pour it where it has to be. You just can't do that type of work. Here's another example of a foundation where they're wanting to pour a foundation, but they fail to remove any of the flagstone on the inside. You can't do that. You got to remove that flagstone. That ground has to be solid before you pour any concrete on there, because you want to sell the foundation. And the reason why that I'm showing you some of these photographs, just to kind of give you an idea of some issues, the do's and don'ts, things that we see out there, things that we don't want you to get in trouble for. So try to stay away from some of these pictures. Here's under Chapter 6. There's a lot of changes that occurred under Chapter 6 where if you look at the NMAC code, a lot of stuff isn't in there. And the reason why that it's not in there, because it's already in the body of the code verbatim, so we just deleted it and stayed what's in the code. But one of the things that we did keep is you are required to have the 1/8 gap on the OSB, which allows for expansion and contraction if you have a stucco system, just to kind of cut down and prevent on some of that cracking from happening. So again, that still is a requirement. If you look at the stamp that's on the plywood, it has it noted as a recommendation. It doesn't matter if it's a recommendation because we made it a requirement in the body of the code, so you have to do it. So if you have an inspector that goes out there says you require that 1/8 gap, it is in the code, so he will cite you for that as a code violation. Here's another thing that we removed under Chapter 6, stud size, height, spacing. See this section as follows, except delete exception number 2. So we deleted this out of the code. Design of construction of log members. I don't know if in the Farmington area, do you guys deal with a lot of heavy timber, vigas, heavy beams? You guys deal with a lot of that? Well, there is an exception in the code that says if you're using any rough sawn lumber, timbers, vigas, etc., and it doesn't have a grade stamp, there is an exception that says that grading report issued by an engineer or architect will be accepted. So if you have some timber that hasn't been graded, you could contact an architect or an engineer to review that. So this is what we're talking about here, vigas and some of the heavy timber. So if you're using heavy timber and say for example like on this back wall there's a heavy timber beam, maybe it's a 6 by 12, but say if it's non-structural and above that, maybe you have a ganglam or microlam, and you have the roof structure resting on top of that, and that beam's more cosmetic, I would see that as no issue, and it don't matter if you have a grade stamp on there or not, because it's non-structural. Even on Vigo, sometimes you have a truss system above, and you'll have the Vigas below. In my eyes, that's non-structural. So just kind of keep that in mind, and if you come across that situation with an inspector, I would just kind of note that to them. Here's a change that we made on this figure over here under 602.7.2 rimboard header construction figure. If you look, where is it at? Right here. We changed this part. We deleted it where it says joist hanger requirement where bearing distance is 1.5 inch. We deleted that out of that figure, so that's where we amended it under this section. Chapter 7, I'm going to get into wall coverings, plaster. This is a big change for residual stucco or stucco material that accumulates at the base of the wall shall be removed before it is allowed to cure, and no horizontal plaster stucco material shall remain on the adjacent grade footing trench, or when provided with a weep screed. Reason is residual stucco that remains continuous with vertical wall assemblies is often a source of moisture wicking, and stucco assemblies is a large contributor to the problem of plaster finish or efflorescence. So if you have a stucco system and once they're done plastering, what they want you to do is get a square shovel edge and remove that stucco away from the bottom of the footing. It doesn't say, take it out, but at least get it away from there before you place your backfill, because that residual stucco that stays at the bottom, it acts as a wick, and it wicks that water back up the wall assembly. So that's the reason why they want you to move it away from that wall assembly. Here's kind of an example, at the bottom of the footing. If you have any residual stucco down there, it's got to be removed away so that it doesn't wick back up that wall assembly there. Same thing applies to roofs. If you have a roof system and you got residual stucco that falls on the inside of that parapet, you got to get that out of there. It's got to be clean. When they do the color code or the brown coat of whatever they're doing, it's probably a pretty good idea to cover it. That way you don't come across this type of situation where there's a lot of cleanup that has to get done. Plaster, exterior plaster may be continued below the weep screed to below the grade, provided there is a complete break in the drainage plane of the building at the location of the horizontal weep screed. Weep screed holes in the screed shall not be plugged during the application of the plaster materials used to cover the foundation insulation. So again, weep screed hasn't gone away. It's still in the code. Anytime you use an acrylic or synthetic, it's required. If you use a cementitious, then it would be different. So the requirements for weep screed are a minimum of 4 inches above earth or ½ inch above paved areas. So here's an example of the actual application of the weep screed when it's all said and done. This is what we're looking for here on the right hand side. And again, you have a nice weep screed there. The holes haven't been compromised. Everything below the weep screed is it's sacrificial. So what we're concerned about is from here above the weep screed. This area I have as an example because oftentimes what happens, if you look at the previous 2 slides where it talks about where you're required to have a minimum of 4 inches below the weep screed, oftentimes what happens is that you have the landscapers that come in after the fact and they bring some topsoil, potting soil, and they start filling in around the house. Next thing you know is they've brought up that earth too high and they've covered up that weep screed. That's not acceptable. So as a contractor, you want to kind of factor that in when you do your final grade. If there's going to be any topsoils that are brought back in, how much? That way you maintain that 4 inches that's required by code. This is a big change is weather restrictive barrier. Delete this section as follows and replace with the following. So this section of the code 703.7.3, it's the same section that is in the 2009. What we did is we deleted what was in the 2015, and the reason for that is the individual layer shall be installed independently, such as each layer provides a separate continuous plane, and any flashing installed in accordance with section 703.4 intended to drain through the water restricted barrier is directed between the layers. So what they were wanting you to do is when you get the jumbo text, it already comes with the 2 layers of paper on it. You put it on there, staple it. What they were wanting you to do is get this paper and do it individually. So that's double the labor costs. And that doesn't make sense, because what we've been doing all this time has worked fine. There's no issues. The stucco industry was involved in this, and they said we have no issues with the way it's always been done, so there's no reason to add that extra cost to the contractor. So we're going to stick with what's in the 2009. I agree. There's no reason to add that extra labor cost, and so we deleted that section out completely. So this is kind of an example of how traditionally it's always been done. You got the 2 layers of paper. You don't have to do them individually, so nothing's changed. Just refer to the NMAC, what's in the 2015 has been amended. So just go to the New Mexico Administrative Code. Unvented attic and unvented enclosed rafter assemblies is a change we made. Unvented attics and unvented enclosed rafters. Let me see this section as follows, except delete condition number 4. So that's the change that we made right there. Here's an example, 806, unvented enclosed rafter assemblies. Now we're going to get into Chapter 9, reglets. This is oftentimes it's a big issue, especially in new construction. You know, you have to have some type of reglet on there or some type of approved flashing, because what it does is anytime you got to come back on the structure and do any type of re-roof, it allows that contractor somewhere to terminate his roofing at. So this is a big deal. It is a requirement. So on any new construction, reglets are required. It is a code requirement. And these are a couple of examples. The one on the right doesn't show up too good, I apologize, but this is an example of what we're talking about when we're talking about a reglet that's required. Plastered parapets shall require a seamless, permeable, waterproof cover or weather barrier capping the entire parapet. So what we're talking about is if you have a parapet assembly, it's got to have some type of waterproofing cover on top of that parapet, and this is the reason why is after the fact, you know, these type of cracks occur, and we want to try to keep that structure dry, and that's the reason for having that waterproof cover. And if you look at talks about some of the nailing, and see a layer of fur. Let me see. So if you have a parapet and you know, we want the weatherproof cover on top, as we want to have minimal nails on top. Any nails that you have to put have to, you know, be on the side. And if you have a parapet that's kind of angled to kind of have like the Southwest Pueblo type of look, you want to maintain minimal nails on that angle side of it as well also. That way we prevent any type of leaking. Another change in this section is a layer of furred expanded metal lath shall be installed over the cover before plaster or stucco is applied. This is one that I don't think is being enforced and should be enforced. And when we talk about on the top of parapets, you should have an expanded metal lath. And if you look at the flat lath, if you look at these like little dimples on there, it's an expanded metal lath that, you know, is a code requirement. Or you have this metal lath here that has the grooves in there. It is required, and the only place it would be required is on the top of those parapets, because you want to make sure that we get enough material in there to prevent any of that cracking from happening. This is another big one in roofing. Roofing is a statewide issue from Farmington all the way down to Las Cruces, Hobbs. I guarantee you there's not a place in the state that we haven't received a complaint on roofing. And one of the things that, especially in northern New Mexico, this is one of the things that a lot of roofers are still trying to use. They're trying to use pumice underneath the roof. As far as I'm concerned, pumice has never been allowed. I don't care what code you've been under, but it's traditionally been allowed, and they have used it. You cannot use it because, any type of roof that you put, the manufacturer specifications state that it's got to be mechanically fastened. If you have pumice underneath that roof, how's it mechanically fastened? It's not. So pumice isn't allowed. On this other picture here on the left, that's the spray foam roof. And if you look, we have the gravel, 3/8 gravel underneath that spray foam roof. And even spray foam roof has to be mechanically fastened. That roof right there is not fastened to anything. You would literally walk on top of it and you could feel that whole roof moving because of that gravel. They didn't bother to remove that gravel. Spray foam is, I tried to make a few changes back in 2000, end of 15, 2016. I wasn't successful, but spray foam, as far as I'm concerned, it all comes down to application. The material is only as good as the applicator. If the applicator doesn't know what he's doing, it doesn't matter what you put on there. And everybody knows spray foam is expensive. So if you're gonna spend that kind of money, you want to make sure that it's done correctly the first time. It's another refresher. So if you have where the roof sheeting is overlapping a cricket, drainage crickets, or valleys to canales, taperboard or equivalent shall be used to transition between the two deck levels to create a uniform substrate. So again, it doesn't matter how the crickets are created. If you want to use a taperboard, it's fine. If you want to use plywood, that's fine. But they are required, because oftentimes what happens is when you don't have these transitions, after the fact, you have the cable guy or the plumbing guy. They come in and got to service the HVAC, or got to put a new satellite, and they step on that roof, and there's no transition on there. Next thing you know, you got a hole on the roof. So you got to make sure that all these transitions have some type of taperboard on there. Canales, this is another change that was made in the 2000, I believe the 2006, I don't remember, but for sure the 2009, where you have to have the 6-inch minimum to each side of the canal or scupper. And the reason for that is that, oftentimes in the winter, of course, water freezes. You got these icicles that form on the edge of the canal. Next thing you know, it's pulling down that whole canal, tears the inside of that material right there. Then it starts thawing out. The canal comes back up. Whatever water's there gets inside that roof structure. So hopefully by having that additional 6 inches, it will prevent any water from backing back up into the structure. So that's the reason for that. So new roof coverings, where an existing roof or roof covering is water soaked or has deteriorated to the point that the existing roof or roof covering is not adequate as a base sheet for additional roofing. So this are some things that are in the code where an existing roof has 2 or more applications of any type of roof covering. So any time any of this applies, you got to remove that. If you have more than 2 roofs, you got to remove that roof all the way down to deck. There's no exceptions in that whatsoever. I had a situation that happened about a month and a half ago. This is a true story. This roofing contractor came to Santa Fe from Albuquerque, and they had this particular house had 3 roofs on it. Also had a pumice roof on it. And this roofing contractor said, well, you know what? Let's just take a shortcut. Nobody will ever know. He said, let's take off the first roof of the pumice and then the second roof, and we'll leave the first one on the bottom. So, of course, he didn't take that roof all the way down the deck as was required. Well, this owner was paying attention, and she filed a complaint. So we went out there, had him do a core test, and sure enough, he had a build-up roof on there that he didn't remove. And that's a code violation. So he had to remove that whole entire roof completely and put a new roof on there. So anytime you have more than 2 roofs on there, it's got to come all the way down a deck. So when we talked about if a roof is water soaked, you know, you got pitch roofs, could be water soaked, that's what we're talking about. These are the type of things that happen. This is some more roofing complaints. You have a flat roof, and on this particular job, the roofer said, well, we'll just use some pro panel. Well, everybody here knows pro panel on a flat roof is not acceptable at all. You know, these are the type of things that we see. So you cannot do that at all. And where we talk about capping the parapets, you know, being waterproof, he said, well, we'll just use some flashing on top of the parapets, I guess. So delete this section of the section 14.7.324, chapter 42, swimming pools. Delete this chapter of the IRC and replace with the following. So what we did on this section under swimming pools is what was in the 2009 under swimming pools, we moved it to the New Mexico Administrative Code. We didn't adopt what was in the 2015 because that required having to reference another manual. And we said, nah, that's not going to work. So what we did is we took what was in the 9, put it in the 2015 under the New Mexico Administrative Code. So if you have any issues dealing with pools, this is the NMAC is the section of the code that you want to reference. Existing buildings and structures compliance when an alteration or repair or is made to exterior stud frame walls of an existing bedrooms. So on this is, I get this call quite a bit, and this is something that is adopted by appendix, is where if you have an existing structure and they want to replace the window egress windows, but they don't touch any of the stud framing, all they're wanting to do is replace like for like, that window does not have to be brought up to code unless they compromise that opening somehow. Then you bring it up to code and it's got to meet the 5.7 square feet. So how many of you guys know that we adopt Appendix J dealing with existing buildings for residential construction? No. So you want to reference it. It's towards the back of the code book. It's something that we do adopt, and you know, depending on what type of structure you're dealing with, and it is an existing structure, there are some exceptions in there to meeting code requirements. So I would advise you to take a look at that. It could help you out in certain situations. One of the things that we did this code cycle is we adopted Appendix R dealing with light straw clay construction. You see a lot of this in northern New Mexico, like the Taos area. You see a lot of it in Tesuque, some of it in Santa Fe. And it was usually done as an alternative, but what we did is ICC came up with an appendixes go round, and what we did is we adopted that appendix. And this is what we're talking about when we're dealing with clay straw. So it's pretty much infill between the studs, clay straw construction. It is in the body of the code, and it is something that is allowed now. Another thing we adopted is in the body of the code, we adopted Appendix S, straw bale construction. As you all know, before we had a straw bale standard. And what we've done is we've deleted that straw bale standard and have adopted the appendix of the building code. So, but the only thing that we did is when the final construction is done, a report must be provided by a by an architect or structural engineer, ensuring that the structure is structurally sound and they've met all the requirements of the code. So that's something that we kept from the straw bale standard. So anytime you deal with straw bale, they will be required to provide a report at the end. So we're talking about when we're dealing with straw bale. Of course, the outside would be plastered with a cementitious plaster. So something I like to advise when you're dealing with straw bale, after the fact, maybe somebody has a straw bale structure and they sell it, and then the new owner comes in and they don't like the color, and then decide, well, we're going to go to a synthetic brown color stucco. And that's not acceptable, because when you're dealing with straw bale, that structure has to breathe. You want to make sure that you maintain a cementitious plaster on there. Right now we're going to get into some of our do's and don'ts. Again, this is stuff that we see out there. So do we have any plumbers, electricians here? Okay. So not you, but I think some plumbers and electricians, I think they need an intervention on proper notching. So not this guy though. So it's, that's the type of stuff that we see out there. And you all know, anytime you compromise a TGI, you got to contact the manufacturer, Boise. The inspector's not going to come up with any type of fix. You're going to have to come up with a fix, and it's going to have to be an engineered fix. Here's another example: is no hangers. TGIs have been compromised. You'll see on the next slide, they had to run all the plumbing through there, so they said, well, we'll just scab a 2x4 there on the side of the TGI, butt it into this other, and put one nail on it. That's what it looks like there from the side. Cut all the plumbing out. We'll just run the 2x4 here on the side. That's not acceptable. You can't do that at all. Here's another project. We'll just cut out the TGI completely. And again, this stuff's got to be planned. You can't just be, butchering those TGIs out of there. You can't do that at all. On this area right here, they said, well, we'll just take out the TGI completely and not bother to block it or put anything back in there. And on this particular job, there's actually tile above, and they're complaining about the tile cracking. And I'm like, well, I wonder why. You guys see the code violation there? On this particular house, they were complaining about sewer gas on the inside of the house. They filed the complaint. We went out there and I forgot to remove the caps on top of the vents. So you just got to watch out for that type of stuff. You guys deal with a lot of Kiva fireplaces in the Farmington area? No, not too much. Well, if you come across any fireplace or somebody asks you to build one, what we want to do is prevent any type of butchering on the fireplace like they did on the side of this fireplace, and then use the wrong type of gas line into that fireplace. And if you notice, what they did is they butchered the whole thing, and they said, well, we'll just infill it with some spray foam and call it good. Again, that doesn't work. And what ended up happening on this particular job is they had to take apart that whole side of that fireplace and build it back the way it should have been. And again, it's not good. On this particular job here, I happened just to be in the area driving by, and I see this addition to a mobile home where they didn't have a permit, and it's something that a general construction inspector would be required to permit in addition to a mobile home. And they have this thing resting on some little 4x4s in the ground. No, it was just, I couldn't believe it. I was just in shock when I saw this one. What's the code violation there? Guys see it? Drywall screws. You can't use, when you use hangers, you got to use required fasteners that are required by the manufacturer, Simpson Strong Tie. If they require nails, you got to use nails. You can't use drywall screws on there, because what happens is those drywall screws pop off. Next thing you know, there's nothing holding that hanger in place. So this is kind of the aftermath of what happens when you use hangers that aren't correct. On this particular project right here, they used one hanger that wasn't placed correctly, caused this whole subfloor assembly to collapse when they were doing some lightweight concrete on top. So that's why you always want to make sure you use the required hangers. Don't ever try to modify any of these. Use what's required by the manufacturer. Again, here's a little bit more of the aftermath of what happens when you don't use the required hangers on projects. So on this particular job right here, we had some framers that came in from Texas, and they started framing this roof structure. And do you guys see what they did on there? On your way. What they did is they placed these 2x4s, started notching the top of the TJIs. It's like, why would you do that? Come on, guys. No, that's not acceptable. I said, well, that's the way we do it in Texas, but that's not the way we do it here in New Mexico. You got to, do it right. On this particular job, I actually emailed these to Boise so they could take a look at it, and they were just literally in shock. They were like, God, are you kidding me? I wouldn't even let these guys build a doghouse. That's how bad it was. If your TGIs are too short, just get some 2x6 blocking and just block it. Again, this is real stuff that we actually see, stuff that happens. Here's another one. TGIs are short. So we'll just get a 2x6 and block it. So the reason why a lot of those photographs that I showed you, I'm not trying to scare anybody or anything, but residential construction is one of our biggest complaints. That's where we see our complaints at. So these are the do's and don'ts that I don't want you guys to get in trouble for. So again, roofing is a big issue. If you have questions, always contact your building official. If you have any questions, contact me. We're there to help you guys. We want to keep you out of trouble. We don't want you guys to get in trouble. Always give us a call if you're unsure, if you have a question, about anything. I have one other thing that I want to show real quick, if I could. So this is just kind of an update, refresher. I don't know if all of you are aware of this, but there are some changes that we made in the license classification and scopes in April of 2016. What we did is we eliminated 9 license classifications. And the reason for that is the way we were looking at it is if you don't permit or you don't inspect, why do you need the license? Like say, for example, painting, GS21, why do you have that classification? And again, you don't permit and inspect, so why even have it? So just kind of give you an example, these are some of the licenses that we eliminated. So we'll start off with the target classifications are GS3 tile, GS10 fencing, GS11 fixtures, cabinets, millwork, GS12 flooring, GS17 ornamental iron welding, GS18 painting and decorating, wallpaper, GS22 sandblasting, GS26 vaults and depositories, and GS28 gunite. For the classifications, a license issued by the CID will no longer be required. What we did was with the GS6, doors will be eliminated as a standalone classification, but will be incorporated into the GS14 windows, which have been revised to include windows, doors, and skylights. So how many of you guys knew that we made those changes? You did? Yeah. So these changes are in effect. So this is the part where you guys could ask whatever questions you have, anything. It doesn't matter what it is. Or is there any questions that you have of CID that we could answer? I'm sure you guys got some questions. Yes, sir.
I didn't understand reglet.
Reglets. So reglet is a metal flashing that's required on the inside of a parapet. anytime you have any type of new roof assembly, you have to have a reglet on the inside of that parapet. That way, when say that owner has to come in and put another roof, they have somewhere to terminate that roofing. So that is something that's in the code, is something that is required. You have to have a reglet on the inside of a parapet.
So is that just basically a flashing piece that sticks out that you can tuck back up?
Yes, a reglet or an approved flashing would be accepted as a reglet. You know, you got to work with your building official for whatever area you're in, but reglets are required. Okay? Any other questions? Something? Another? No?
I have one.
Okay.
And just for you guys here, in the 2015 residential code, there's a new section for decks. You're covering it up. I know you guys are going to rush down and buy a new IRC so you can find out about it. If you can't do that, go online to American Wood Council. We have some good information. One of the things you need to know is that the joist spans are different for regular lumber. They have a wet service index that they assign to joists now for decks. Their span tables are different from regular span tables for suppliers or anybody that's thinking about building a deck. You really need to go to the provisions of that. There's some new language, cantilevers. If you have one cantilever, two cantilevers, no cantilevers, it determines your joist size, spacing, depth. So that's going to affect you. If you have a two-story deck, for instance, there's some requirements for tension ties. Not a lot of people understand that too much. It depends if your joists are on your house are parallel or perpendicular to those and how those are done. They're generally at quarter points. There's been a lot of deck collapses. That's why the new code provisions for that. So if you're designing a home or a deck, be aware that we're going to take a look at spans and spacing and all the requirements that you're going to have for either tension ties or other requirements as far as hardware goes. So it is quite extensive. It's a lot of information. So if you cannot or don't have access to a code book, go online to AWC and check it out.
He is correct, that is in there, and once again, we didn't change any of that. It's still in the code the way it is verbatim. You know, again, today's changes were just significant changes or amendments to the code. So, any other questions?
Martin?
Yes.
I'll just make a comment. Before we decided to go to the 2015 code, we really did an extensive review of 2012. As you know, we've been in 2009 since then, and so it was quite a jump to move to the 2015. I think it's very important for New Mexico to stay current with its codes. It helps insurance costs, everyone else, but and it's certainly a safety issue. But in looking at the 12, it was really almost, in our opinion, kind of going backwards. It was much more expensive. It was more complicated than the 9. 15 is more in line with what the 9 is or was. And so I think that's definitely the right decision. The people in the construction industry, contractors, and on the commercial side, the IRC, really embraced the 2015 code. There's a lot of things in commercial building, public schools, things like that, that allows more flexibility. The tread, stairs, all that, the width of ingress and egress on multi-story buildings in public schools, etc., gives the architects, the designers, a lot more flexibility. We had architects designing buildings for the 2015 code and just waiting until it would be adopted so they could build it, knowing that it would be less costly than even the 2000, certainly than the 12, and even less costly than the 2009. So I think it's the right move forward, and if you guys have additional questions, never hesitate to contact CIP. We really want to be more than just a code approval, code enforcement kind of an agency. We should be consultants, we should be advisors, and our inspectors are really knowledgeable in their various fields, general construction, mechanical, electrical. Use them, ask questions, go online, and you can get the right answers before you go too far down the line and we end up having to have something rebuilt or replaced or correct to work with us. We really want to open that up. It's one of the reasons we eliminated 9 classifications. We just, that was an expense that was being made to the industry that really didn't need, because we had no regulatory authority over those kind of things. We're not testing and inspecting and all of that. So I think it really is the right thing to do. And we're trying to reduce some bureaucracy if at all possible in something like this with code enforcement rather than add to it. So we appreciate the invitation here today and the time you've given us. And really don't hesitate to call these guys. These guys are the experts in their field. Martine is the CBO for the state. We can respond and answer your questions right away. And keep you out of a lot of trouble, probably. Save some time. So again, thank you. Appreciate it.
It was talking about making provision for these tiny houses coming in,
Yeah.
and stairs is one of the ones, about,
Right.
you know, allowing almost a ladder type thing, if it's so many square feet, you're
Sure.
fitting into kind of a park model situation. Is there a different code or a new code? Or
There's starting to be one. Right now, there is not a code that addresses the tiny home, the tiny house, and it's a whole new, it's a cultural movement, and it's not just New Mexico, it's nationwide, and it's big, and it's here to stay, believe me. And so what the IRC, their national codes have recognized this, and they developed what's called the Appendix 5, and it addresses tiny homes specifically. And it's going to be part of the 2018 General Construction Code, the IRC. And we're looking at we formed a subcommittee within the TAC, our Technical Advisory Council of the General Construction Bureau. Martine's been heading that up. And we've had the subcommittee's been looking at that index. We've tweaked it a little bit over the last month and a half, 2 months, to Mexico compliance, Mexico standards. Tiny houses defined as anything residential under 400 square feet. And so now we'll have it, by adopting that Appendix 5 into our 2015 code that we just adopted, we'll have a code that we can design to and that contractors can build to. It recognizes sleeping loft, whereas the current code does not even speak of the word loft. It's under the modular standards now, and the modular standards just don't fit the tiny house concept. So with this new Appendix 5, I think it'll be better for all of us. We're looking at going to a public hearing on that. We'll be publishing that. It has to be published for at least 30 days. We're going to bring that to our commission meeting coming up this next week, actually, and move forward with a public hearing. And then we'll get all the feedback from the public, and that'll have to be incorporated into this adoption. And then we'll get approval from administration to move forward to adopt that into our 2015 code. Again, making sure that it's not costing us more, but it's addressing the building industry. So the tiny house is a 4-letter word that we don't like to talk about, but it's here. It's going to stay here, and we need a code that meets that. And I think this is going to give that to us.
Sounds like you're adopting something similar to the RVIA for a park model, which is the 400 square feet, addresses the lofts, addresses all that sort of thing.
It's similar, but the park model is really for temporary. It's not a permanent dwelling. It doesn't fall under the definition of dwelling unit that we must maintain in the building code. But yeah, it's along those lines.
And then you have a terminology where it fits into our planning and zoning, because we don't have anything in our planning and zoning in this county that allows for that.
We have no jurisdiction over planning and zoning. That's always a local municipality issue. And so I think that various municipalities are going to have to look at the tiny homes and figure out how they're going to zone those. A lot already are. We've getting a lot of phone calls. There's a group in the southern part of the state that's developing a whole development area with those smaller lots and the setbacks that they're going to allow for these models. We're getting calls daily. Martine gets 4 to 5 calls a day. Actually, we just got phone calls in the last month and a half from China, from Vietnam. They're looking at those containers, the metal containers that they ship over on boats. They've contacted us. They want us to send them to New Mexico code, our compliance for housing, for dwellings, and they're going to build these things in manufacturing plants in China to our code, and then ship them to New Mexico. Valencia County is looking at doing this pretty quickly, and so they'll come to New Mexico with designed and built according to our codes, and then they'll have to adapt all the setup and everything. We'll be using local New Mexico licensed contractors, subcontractors for signing utility hookups and all that. A lot of these containers, they're looking into attaching a UL label to them. If they come with a UL label or an ANSI label or some kind of listing that's accepted, we're not even going to we'll accept that right away, and they'll come into the state, and again, we'll cite them for our regular construction modular standards. But it's coming.
Give me contact information for that?
Pardon me?
Give me contact information for who's requesting that out of China?
Out of where?
Martinez.
For who's requesting that?
Out of China.
Yeah, you could, do you want to give me your email or email me? Yeah, so,
It's a new world.
yeah. We just received an email over the weekend where in Las Cruces they're proposing these storage containers, but they don't want single story, now they want to do 2-story. So things are all over the place.
Just double the problem.
Yeah. So, good.
I'm curious because Santa Fe Wood in Albuquerque, I believe,
Uh-huh.
they're built out of those storage containers.
That's correct, yes.
How was that considered in terms of that development project?
Well, it's an engineered product is basically what it came down to. It's engineered, for that design. That's how it was approved. And that's they're trying to mirror that same design in the city of Espanola where Hunter Motor used to be. They're trying to mirror that same design as they built in Albuquerque. They kind of want to make it like a farmer's market area, brewery, where they have like, farming goods and stuff like that. So, these things are happening all over the place.
These units in China will be handled just like we handle the modular units coming in from other states, surrounding states. There's third-party inspections. We'll have review and approval of those third-party inspectors, make sure that they're qualified and you can certify them, and they'll be looking at these in the plant. So we'll maintain control over that. We're basically just setting up a manufacturing plant there to do just this product. It is a manufacturing product, but it gets inspected in the plant, and that label is attached and sent over.
Any other questions?
Nobody in the United States that does that? Why do we have to go to China?
There's not too many manufacturing plants that are doing it right now. They're starting to gear up to that. The HUD, we have 2 plants in New Mexico, one in Albuquerque, the Carson plant. They do a HUD unit, and HUD doesn't do anything less than below 400 square feet. So that's the problem there. And then the modulars. Carson doesn't build Carson builds modulars, and they're looking at doing that. Some of the modulars are built that we're seeing are going to be in a plant, and if that's the case, then yeah, it'd be much better for everyone. Some of them are site built. Some are building components, the walls and everything, then they go out, take them out to the site and erect them on site there. So that's just another way of putting them together. So there's all different kinds. There's a group that's going to start building these spec tiny homes. I don't know how that's going to work, but we'll see. But each one is going to be different. We're going to have to address our code reviews and our inspections accordingly. So it's a challenge, it really is.
Thank you.
Anything else? No? Thank you. All right.